music teacher friends. Welcome to episode 135 of the Beyond Measure podcast. This is me, Christina Whitlock, your host, producer, and anytime piano teacher friend. Today is stop number 7 on my summer bookshelf tour. In case you're just jumping in this summer, I've been giving listeners a peek into some of my most influential music teacher reading material. I offer 3 takeaways from each of these books, all of which have far more to offer than just 3 ideas, but my hope is to inspire you to check out these materials for yourself. Today, we are looking at a biggie, The Ways Children Learn Music by Eric Bluestine. Let's get to it. Okay, many of you know this book and are dying to know what I have to say about it. Others of you have no idea what this book is, and congratulations, I am about to open up a very different world of music education for you. Today's book, The Ways Children Learn Music, is often considered to be the easiest entry point into the research of Dr. Edwin Gordon, who developed this approach called music learning theory. That's MLT for short, so I'll be using that abbreviation a lot this episode. If I could say one thing about MLT, well, I have lots of things to say about it, but I will start with this. It offers some really important considerations, especially when we place it in contrast with the majority of teaching materials on the market today. Now, here's your disclaimer. I'm kind of nervous to talk about this episode. There are a lot of what I will call MLT police out there who are very quick to call people out who don't portray this work in what they consider to be the correct light. I think this is because music learning theory is a very scholarly practice. That's actually one of the things I love about this work. Edwin Gordon and all of those who carry this torch, they're very committed to research and to quantifying their data as much as possible. There's a ton of nuance to this work. So when you go down the MLT rabbit hole, you end up in a world full of certifications and trainings and literature coming out your ears. Again, I personally love that aspect of it. I am all for increasing the scholarly merit around what we do. But I also want to be clear that I hold 0 certifications in music learning theory. So if this content sounds interesting to you, I have some great recommendations waiting for you at the end of today's episode and in the show notes. I am not your girl to talk to you about official Gordon-related topics, but I am happy to point you in the right direction, including today's featured reading, The Ways Children Learn Music. So, let the record show, I am not an MLT expert, okay? What I am is an experienced piano teacher who finds great value in studying this work and using it alongside other materials in various ways. If you know me, you know that I have a very hard time limiting myself to specific materials or ideologies because I just love them all. And honestly, that's probably not going to change in my lifetime. But I know for many, once they venture down this MLT path, it becomes more and more alluring, and they'll find themselves only wanting to teach this one methodology for the rest of their careers. Honestly, I'm a little jealous of them because I think it must be amazing to be able to zero in on one approach that you believe in that strongly. So I don't know, call me non-committal or whatever, but I'm not there yet. And it makes me a little nervous to speak to Gordon's ideas when I am well aware that I am not on the inside of that club. But I always find myself wanting to hear more of how teachers who are not exclusively MLT teachers could incorporate some of these ideas into our teaching. So, since that's what I want to see in the world, I guess I'm going first today. So, that's my goal. Not to vouch one way or the other, but just to say that, hey, there are some really important considerations here as to how children learn music. So let's just see how they might apply to all of our lessons. In fact, as Bluestine himself says on page 21 of this book, music learning theory is nothing more than a collection of ideas. Terrific ideas, but ideas nonetheless. It's up to us to make those ideas work. End quote. Whew, okay. Can you tell I'm edgy about this? Here we go. Takeaway number 1 for today is really just reconsidering the role of notation in making music. All right, this is pretty much like the thing that differentiates music learning theory from all the other methodologies out there. But I'm going to primarily use my own words, but this is something that Bluestine will help you realize throughout the book. We have to start realizing that teaching our students music is not exclusively about teaching our students to read from the printed score. At the heart of this whole idea is what Gordon refers to as audiation. Now, audiation is a big buzzword in music teacher world these days. It's also highly misinterpreted, and I am not putting myself in the middle of that one today. But let me ask you this. Would you ever tell a child that what they had to say did not matter because they weren't capable of reading it off a page? Of course not. That's absurd. But let me offer up a familiar scenario. Let's say you watch a video of a young prodigy type on YouTube, and he's playing a Bach partita. I mean, how can a child so young be playing a Bach partita, right? For so many of us, it's just astounding. And in, I think, a half-hearted attempt to make it make sense, teachers often start saying things like, oh, well, they are just copying what they've been shown because there's no way they're reading that from the score. But my question to you today is, does that actually matter? Like, is that child's musical offering any less stirring if it came from the page or if it didn't? Is that child any less of a musician? I mean, of course not. This judgment drives me nuts in our world, my friends. There are so many piano teachers out there, including previous versions of myself, who mistakenly present lessons that claim to teach students how to play the piano, when really they're just strictly teaching how to read music at the piano. And I think of this as like teaching reading rather than teaching music. And in my mind, that's a very important distinction. Now, is learning to read notation a terrible thing? Of course not. It is a very important thing to me. I want my students to become strong sight readers. It's one of my primary goals because it is one of my strengths and passions in this work. I think being a good sight reader opens up all kinds of doors and prevents us from being limited. So I'm all for that. But my approach to teaching reading is also quite a bit different than what I see out in the world. I am very cognizant of when I am teaching students to read their music. It is one goal out of many in a lesson. So when my students are learning to read their notation, I am laser focused on the task at hand. I don't dilute that skill throughout the whole lesson. When we're working on technique, though, I am completely tuned into that. And when we are exploring sounds on the instrument and how certain harmonies lead into other harmonies, I am 100% invested in exploration. When we're working on new concepts, we work on the concept away from the notation because the concept is what matters. And I suppose that can bring us to a second point for today. Many variations of this idea exist, for the record, but Chapter 5 of The Ways Children Learn Music is titled Sound Before Sight Before Theory. Sound before sight before theory. For our purposes today, this is essentially a plea to reconsider how you introduce new concepts to your students. Bluestine quickly points out that this was not an idea original to Gordon. He cites a curriculum developer named Lowell Mason, who was writing about the idea of sound before sign back in 1838. In piano teacher world, many of us attribute this idea to the incredible Francis Clark, who famously touted the importance of sound before symbol throughout the 20th century. Even I have my own take on this idea. In my Studio Foundations course, one of my 14 foundational principles of music teaching is what I call experience before label. I've talked about this in different ways on the podcast before, but, well, it's probably obvious at this point. Friends, stop introducing concepts by their name first. Any variation of, today I'm going to teach you what the word accelerando means. Any variation of that needs to be stripped from your vocabulary, okay? Before I ever utter the word accelerando, before my student sees ACCEL period abbreviated in their music, I close the book in front of them. I have students stand up and we begin to sway to a pulse while I play. I gradually increase my tempo, which will be reflected in their movement. Or maybe we listen to a famous piece of music, like, Grieg's In the Hall of the Mountain King, that incorporates a noticeable accelerando. Both of those ideas fit this idea of sound before symbol, as Francis Clark suggested, or, again, as Bluestine calls it in this book, sound before sight before theory. But we could also simply have a student imitate a heartbeat by patting her hand on her chest as I do the same. And then I could guide her to gradually feel that heartbeat accelerate. There's not really any sound to that component, but it's definitely an experience, right? And after a student has experienced this idea of an accelerando, ideally in more than one way, then I can give it a name, and then I can point it out in her piece for the week. So I'm laughing to myself over here because here I am offering this up as a takeaway from Bluestine when I'm totally using my own terminology for it. But whatever you want to call it, I would strongly consider you to read more of Bluestine's ideas on this philosophy. One quick note here, the idea of sound before symbol or any variation on this idea often comes under fire from teachers who specialize in students with auditory processing disorders. Now, this is an absolutely important consideration, and I happen to think it adds even more fuel to my fire of this idea of experiencing before labeling, because you can tweak this in whatever way that experience will help a student better grasp the intent of the concept. But again, this is one of those areas where nothing is going to work 100% of the time for 100% of the students. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I wish that I had a catch all solution to all things, but it doesn't exist. All right, friends. I am finding it very difficult to get through the content of this episode in our usual 20 minutes or less. So I'm going to attempt to introduce this third point to you in the most succinct way possible. But please understand that I am opening up an enormous can of worms here. Yeah? Okay. We are going to take a very quick look at chapter 7 of The Ways Children Learn Music, which deals with rhythm syntax. For perspective, this follows an equally important chapter on tonal syntax, which is also quite essential to music learning theory. We just don't have time to go there today. Sorry. So, when I compare the way that I talk about rhythm today to the way that I used to teach it, I realize that I used to be really focused on what I consider to be musical math. And musical math does have its value, but it's only a small, tiny fraction of the overall rhythmic picture. So I'm going to give you a terrible confession right now, okay? Albeit it's one that many of you will actually relate to. There was a point in time in my teaching where I really taught time signatures as more of an afterthought. I mean, it was music math, right? There are 3 beats in all of these measures, or there are 4. And then, oh man, when you introduce 6/8 time, whoa, we turn everything on its head, right? Those quarter notes don't always get 1 beat after all, do they? Gotcha. Friends, establishing the ability to feel things like duple versus triple meter is absolutely fundamental to good musicianship. And, contrary to popular belief, your students do not have to wait for the 3rd book in their method series before they are introduced to compound meter. I know, what? My dry erase board is my favorite teaching tool of all time. I am constantly sketching out short rhythmic patterns, like from lesson number 1. And these patterns involve a variety of meters and divisions of the beat. And, shocker, I almost never have students count by numbers anymore. I know, it's really wild. Now, this is one of those sequences in MLT world that many Gordon teachers are sticklers about. So please know, again, I am not trained in the MLT rhythmic sequences, and I just use what I've picked up at various conferences and online videos and whatnot. But I will say this, from the very beginning of lessons, I do a lot of rhythmic echo exercises with my students. I prefer just using the neutral syllable ba, which is very much a first step Gordon thing, like ba, 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 ba. Students will repeat that back and forth, or ba, 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 ba. My students and I, again, repeat this rhythmic pattern back and forth, all while we're swaying to the larger pulse. And then, eventually, I will sketch out that rhythmic pattern on my dry erase board. At that point, it just makes sense to them. They see how the sounds we're making are translated into rhythmic symbols, which, are pictures of the sound. And nowhere have I introduced this idea of a note getting half a beat or whatever. This is pulse. It's not music math. So after we do those echo patterns, I will have students play rhythms back to me on a single key or a chosen sequence of keys. And this is just one example, but I do a lot of this kind of thing. And I should say that I also do use a variety of printed materials in lieu of my dry erase board, but I do love how endlessly customizable I can be with my trusty board. There's just so much here. I have not even mentioned the quintessential difference between macro beats and micro beats and melodic rhythm and all of these other things. But in my experience, and this is surely up for debate, but I find the rhythmic implications of Gordon's work in music learning theory to be perhaps the most game-changing to those of us who grew up learning out of more traditional methods. At some point in the future, I promise we'll delve more into this. I am actually working on a series of my own resources that help teachers understand how I teach notation and how I teach rhythm in a manner that's going to work with any method you teach from. So stay tuned for that one because I am really hoping it gets officially launched into the world this year. But in the meantime, if I have piqued your curiosity with any of these ideas today, I want to point you towards people who do actually know the ins and outs of music learning theory. So, since you are obviously a podcast listener, I would first direct you towards the Everyday Musicality podcast. This podcast is hosted by Heather Schuldis, and she is amazing at introducing these concepts in relatable ways. It is a mega impressive effort over there. Like, mad respect to the Everyday Musicality team. I will also direct you to Krista Yadro at Music Learning Academy. Krista has an incredible wealth of resources for you, including a series of podcasts, as well as a collection of online courses that are incredibly robust and packed with quality information. I am actually enrolled in one of those courses, but I had also signed up mid-pandemic, and I have just really let my studies slide. Writing this episode has definitely convicted me to get back into it. Lastly, if you are a piano teacher and you're wondering how to teach these things within the context of a method, we have the absolute gift of the method series Music Moves for Piano. Music Moves for Piano is an MLT-based piano method that is unlike anything else you have ever seen. It was painstakingly researched and developed by a gem of a human named Marilyn Lowe, who sadly left this earth in 2022. You know how I feel about legacy in this profession, and I can't do justice to just how much of a legacy this woman left. But back to the method. Purchasing the Keyboard Games books A and B, plus the teacher's guide. The teacher's guide is absolutely essential, by the way. And then looking into Krista Yadro's courses is probably a really solid path to get you started using the method correctly. So, if all of this has your head spinning, please know that I have links to all of these things and more in the show notes at christinawhitlock.com/episode 135. Okay. I know I am way over time here, friends, so let's do a quick toast and get you on with your day. Though, do stick around for the end of the episode because I have a fun announcement for you that you will not want to miss. Studio music teacher friends from all around the world. The most challenging, yet also encouraging thing I can tell you today is this. When it comes to our teaching, we get to choose what we loved about our own studies and continue that legacy in our own work. By the same token, we also get to change the things we didn't like, or the things that didn't work, or the things that didn't give us the whole picture of music. I hope today's episode has challenged you to think about how we can do things more effectively and also encourage us to stay on the course of those areas that we are already doing well. both can be and are true at the same time. This is me raising my glass to you, my knowledgeable, growth mindset-seeking friends. Hear, hear. Okay, I promised a fun announcement, and here it is. The National Conference of Keyboard Pedagogy, that's NCKP, is almost here, and I am so excited to have time with my teacher friends, new and old. I will be presenting on Wednesday of the NCKP conference at 5:30. My session is called The Teacher as the Method, Learn to Depend Less on Books and More on Individual Expertise. I am really looking forward to this session, and I hope to see you there. Also exciting, I am teaming up with my friend Amy Chaplin of the Piano Pantry blog and podcast, and we will be hosting an informal meetup at NCKP on Thursday at 4:15 in the hotel lobby. We each have a little something to give you as a thank you for stopping by and introducing yourself, so mark your agendas for Thursday at 4:15. We'll be there for about 45 minutes in the Westin lobby for a fun little meetup. I know several of you are coming who I've never met in person, and I am so pumped to share actual physical space with you. Okay, that's a wrap on episode 135 of the Beyond Measure podcast. We have 2 more episodes in the summer bookshelf tour, and, well, I'll just say it now. They are so good. Thank you for letting me add so many things to your TBR lists this summer. And I also wanted to mention that a few weeks ago, I started sending a weekly letter to those on my email list. And I am surprised by how much fun I'm having writing that. So I call it One Thought Thursdays. And if you would like to hear from me on Thursdays in your inbox, make sure you head to christinawhitlock.com/subscribe to get on that list. I will post a link to that and to the archives in today's episode notes. All right, that's it for today. Thank you for hanging out with me over time today. Why don't you take some time and learn something new this week, will you? I'd love to hear what you're up to. So come find me at Beyond Measure Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. And until next week, friends, onward and upward.